believe in heaven? Hamlet asked. He moved his hand across the brown carpet and moved it back. I don't know, said Francis. The two boys sat on the clean floor of Hamlet's mom's living room. Hamlet looked across to Francis dreamily. If heaven existed, Hamlet asked, what do you think it would be like? Francis looked as if he was pondering. I don't know, he said finally. It sounds nice. Hamlet leaned toward Francis. I think if I were going to heaven, I'd want it to be like the beach, he said. Oh, that does sound nice, said Francis. The walls of the living room were covered with framed family pictures. Francis looked at each one. He saw portraits of Hamlet when he was younger and of Hamlet's mom and dad when they were still together, and some of the dog. The dog walked through the living room on the way to the kitchen. Hamlet took Francis' shirt off. Don't do that, said Francis. Hamlet kissed Francis on the mouth. Hamlet kissed Francis on the mouth again and touched his chest. Francis closed his eyes. Francis took his socks off. I think my feet are smelly, said Francis. Francis felt the carpet on his bare feet and then on his bare chest. They kissed again. They kissed again. They touched. Do you think the road is going to be finished soon, Hamlet asked? Francis closed his eyes. I don't know, he said. Do you think the road is going to be built at all? Asked Hamlet. I'm not sure, said Francis. Tell me what you think. The two boys were silent for a long time. What do you want to be when you grow up? Hamlet asked. Said Francis. An astronaut, I guess. The air was coming out of the air conditioning unit and it made a low noise constantly. Francis put his shirt on and held up a book and held still looking at his own hands holding the book. Hamlet watched what Francis was doing. What are you doing? Asked Hamlet. Francis listened to the low noise of the air conditioning unit that was providing cool air. What are you doing? Asked Hamlet again. I don't know, said Francis. They kissed again. The dog walked through the living room on the way upstairs. The boys were silent for a long time. Finally, Hamlet spoke. I guess I don't care if the road's finished or not, he said. I don't care either, then, said Francis. Hamlet stood up and looked down at Francis. Do you think we should go out to the field and practice our guns? He asked. Francis said, I guess so, if you think it's a good idea. Hamlet got back down on the floor of the living room and kissed Francis again and helped Francis put his socks back on. The air was warm, but there was a breeze. The two boys walked in the tall weeds on the side of the street that led to the field. The trees swayed gently, and the birds both chirped and flew around. If you could be anybody, asked Hamlet, who would you be? Francis was silent for a moment. That's a hard question, he said. I'm not sure. Hamlet and Francis held hands as they walked. Who would you be? Asked Francis. I asked you first, said Hamlet. Oh, said Francis. You're right. Francis looked as if he were pondering. I would be Cinderella, I guess, he said finally. Why would you be Cinderella? Asked Hamlet. Because she got to be so happy and live in a nice castle, said Francis. And it was like heaven. It's a nice day today, said Hamlet. It's so nice, said Francis. The telephone poles leaned in different directions and cast thin, tall shadows on the pale street that led to the field. And then there weren't telephone poles anymore, and the boys followed along the side of the street in the tall weeds, and then the street stopped. And there was a twisted metal guardrail, and beyond that, the field. Look, it's a dead dog, said Francis. Hamlet looked around and saw a carcass right where the road ended. It doesn't look like a dog, said Hamlet. The carcass looked like a matted fur coat, stained with blood and thrown carelessly on the ground. Maybe it's not a dog anymore, said Francis. Hamlet wiped his foot in the blood on the street, but it was dry. Do you want to say a prayer? Asked Francis. No, let's practice our guns like we said Hamlet. Okay, said Francis. Each boy took out his gun and held it in his hand. Then they walked together far into the field. Each boy aimed at distant trees and shot at them. Are we hitting the targets? Asked Francis. I'm not sure, said Hamlet. We're too far away. I think you're probably a good shot, said Francis. Thanks, said Hamlet. They kept shooting at distant trees, not knowing if they hit them, but after a while started shooting at the ground and the sky. I'm out of bullets, said Francis. When we kill everyone? Asked Hamlet. Who are you going to kill? I don't know, said Francis. "I want to kill the principal and the gym teacher, definitely," said Hamlet. "I would like to kill the gym teacher," said Francis. "All right," said Hamlet. "Then I will kill the basketball team." The forest was wide, it was dark. That was the forest on the edge of town that was full of tall old pine trees with many needles on every branch that repulsed the sunshine. The forest used to be a farm that grew pine trees for Christmas, but the farm fell into disrepair, the owner left, and the trees just grew. When the trees were left alone, they grew and more trees came up. And all the trees got so tall, and the branches of each tree reached out in all directions, and the thin green needles grew there. All the thin needles of the branches together repulsed the sunshine and cast the forest floor below into darkest shadow. The forest floor was lightless. It was damp. The forest floor was made up of patches of muddy earth and patches of grass, moss, and nettles. The land was uneven. Creatures that loved the darkness lived in the pine tree forest, but they couldn't be seen. The shameful noise of the hidden creatures was heard, and the musty smell of them was detectable, but they lurked in the shadows transparently. The creatures chewed the moss and the slime that grew on the coarse trunks of the pine trees, and they swallowed the mushrooms and small flowers that grew out of the muddy earth. Small and complicated flowers relished the darkness provided by the tall old pine trees, and they grew there. When the wind blew, a beastly whistling snarled through the thicket of the branches, and many green needles rained furiously down from the branches of the old trees onto the forest floor. When the wind didn't blow, the sound of all the darkness was there in a chorus. The trunk of every tall old pine tree was different. Each trunk was covered in different patterns of coarse bark. Each trunk was a slightly different color of brown and had a slightly different thickness. There was one trunk of one tall old pine tree that was especially distinct. It was at the center of the pine tree forest. There was one trunk that was marked, one trunk of one pine tree. The pine tree at the center of the forest had a surface that had been meticulously stripped of coarse bark, and on that tree, on the smooth, naked surface of that especially different tree, some words had been carved with a knife, probably. The words had been carved in big, deliberate letters. They read, "On March 15, in the awful year of 1995, the whole world is going to be burned to the ground, and then all will perish."